I kissed my wife goodbye at 5 in the morning, telling her I would be gone for a week to visit my sick sister in Florida. I lied. I drove my truck around the block parked in a hidden alleyway and waited with a pair of binoculars. 30 minutes later, a black Lincoln Continental pulled up to my crumbling driveway, and the woman who walked out of my house was not the wife I had been married to for 40 years. She was wearing a silk dress I had never seen and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag that cost more than my truck. But the real shock came when the driver opened the door for her, and I heard him say, "Good morning, Mrs. Vanderbilt." Before I tell you how I uncovered $1 million fraud inside my own marriage, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever had a gut feeling that someone you loved was playing you for a fool, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the rest of this investigation. My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm 70 years old, and for the last decade I have lived like a pauper because my wife Beatrice told me we were broke. I am a retired structural engineer. I built bridges that span rivers and highways that cross states. I know how to calculate load and stress. I know how to spot a hairline fracture in concrete before the whole thing comes down. But I never saw the cracks in my own foundation until last week. It started at 5 this morning. The air in our small suburban house in Charlotte was cold because Beatrice refuses to turn the heat up past 65 degrees. She says we cannot afford the gas bill. I dragged my old battered suitcase to the front door. The wheels squeaked against the linoleum floor that has been peeling for 5 years. Beatrice stood by the door in her faded pink bathrobe, the one with the coffee stain on the lapel that she has worn every morning since 2015. She looked tired. She looked like a woman worn down by inflation and medical bills. She hugged me and her body felt stiff. "You drive safe, Tom," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "Call me when you get to your sister's. I will stay here and pray for her recovery. Do not worry about me. I will just do some cleaning and maybe go to the grocery store if I can find some coupons." It was a perfect performance. The devoted wife sending her husband off on a family emergency. But I saw her eyes. While she was hugging me, her eyes were not on my face. They were darting to the old clock on the kitchen wall. She was not checking the time because she was worried about my drive. She was checking the time because she was on a schedule. I walked out to my 2010 Ford F-150. It needs a new transmission, and the paint is fading on the hood, but Beatrice said we could not afford to fix it. I threw my bag in the passenger seat and looked back at the house. She was already closing the door. She did not wave. She did not watch me leave. The latch clicked shut with a finality that made my stomach turn. I started the engine and drove down the street. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a jackhammer. I felt sick. Part of me wanted to keep driving. Part of me wanted to get on I-85 South and actually go to Florida. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was just a paranoid old man who had spent too much time alone since retirement. But then I remembered the receipt. That damning piece of paper was the reason I was doing this. 3 days ago, I was taking out the trash. Beatrice is meticulous about shredding documents, but she must have been in a rush. Stuck to the bottom of a discarded yogurt container was a crumpled receipt from the Serenity Spa and Salon downtown. It was dated last Tuesday. The total was $1,200 for a keratin treatment and coloring. $1,200. When I confronted her about her hair looking different, she told me she had cut it herself in the bathroom sink to save us $20. She made me switch to generic blood pressure medication last month because the brand name copay went up by $15. She cried at the kitchen table over the price of eggs. And yet here was a receipt for more money than we spend on groceries in 3 months. I could not reconcile the woman who washed Ziploc bags to reuse them with the woman who dropped $1,000 at a luxury salon. The math did not work. And as an engineer, when the math does not work, you do not ignore it. You investigate. I drove 3 blocks west, then turned left into a narrow service alley that runs behind the row of houses opposite ours. It is a spot teenagers use to smoke where nobody looks. I killed the engine. I had a clear line of sight to my front porch through the gap between the neighbors' hedges. I poured a cup of coffee from my thermos, but my hands were shaking so bad I spilled it on my jeans. I did not care. I raised the binoculars and adjusted the focus. 5:15 a.m. The house was dark. 5:30 a.m. A light flickered on in the master bedroom. That was strange. Beatrice usually goes back to sleep after I leave, or she sits in the kitchen with her tea. Why was she in the bedroom with the lights blazing? 5:45 a.m. The light in the bedroom went out. A light came on in the living room. I saw a shadow move past the window. It moved fast, energetic. This was not the shuffle of a woman with bad knees who complains about her arthritis every time it rains. This was someone moving with purpose. Then came the waiting. The silence in the truck was suffocating. I kept thinking about our bank account. The joint savings account had $4,000 in it. That was it. That was our safety net. If the water heater broke, we were in trouble. I had been living in fear of a financial emergency for years. I stopped playing golf. I stopped buying new clothes. I wore these same work boots for 6 years. I did it for us. I did it because I thought we were a team fighting to survive on a fixed income. 5:58 a.m. A car turned onto our street. It was not a neighbor. We live in a working-class neighborhood. People here drive Toyotas and Hondas and pickup trucks like mine. This vehicle glided over the potholes like a hovercraft. It was a black Lincoln Continental limo service. The windows were tinted so dark, they looked like oil slicks. The car shone under the streetlights, polished to a mirror finish. It slowed down in front of my house. "No," I whispered to myself. "You have the wrong address, buddy. Keep moving." But it did not keep moving. It stopped directly in front of my walkway. The driver, a man in a black suit, got out. He did not look like he belonged on this street either. He checked his watch and stood by the rear passenger door. 6:00 a.m. exactly. My front door opened. I lowered the binoculars for a second and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the stress was making me hallucinate. I raised them again. It was real. Beatrice stepped onto the porch. I gasped. The sound was involuntary, a sharp intake of air that burned my lungs. The woman on my porch was Beatrice, but it was not my Beatrice. The faded pink bathrobe was gone. The gray hair that she usually tied back in a messy bun was styled in an elegant sweeping updo that probably cost that $1,200 I saw on the receipt. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that hugged her waist. Over her shoulders, she had draped a cashmere shawl. She was wearing high heels. My wife, who complained that her feet hurt if she stood for 10 minutes, was wearing 3-inch stilettos. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked rich. In her hand, she gripped a leather handbag with the Louis Vuitton monogram. I know what those cost because my granddaughter showed me one in a magazine once and told me it was worth more than a semester of college. Beatrice locked the door to our run-down little house, the house with the peeling paint and the mortgage she said we were struggling to pay, and she turned to walk down the path. She did not limp. She did not hunch. She walked with the grace of a queen descending from her throne. The driver opened the rear door of the Lincoln. He bowed his head slightly. The morning air was still and sound carries in our quiet neighborhood. Through the open window of my truck, I heard him speak clear as a bell. "Good morning, Mrs. Vanderbilt." Beatrice smiled a smile I had not seen in 20 years and slid into the leather interior of the luxury car. The driver closed the door gently. He got back in the front, and the Lincoln pulled away, gliding silently down the street toward the highway. I sat there in my old truck, frozen. Mrs. Vanderbilt, not Mrs. Bennett, not Beatrice. Mrs. Vanderbilt. That is a name associated with old money, with dynasties, with power. Why was a limo driver calling my wife by the name of one of the richest families in American history? My mind was racing. I felt like the ground had opened up and swallowed me whole. The shock was quickly replaced by a cold, hard rage. She was not going to the grocery store. She was not praying for my sister. She was living a double life. I started the engine of the Ford. It roared to life with a rattle that sounded pathetic compared to the Lincoln. I was not going to Florida. I was going to follow that car to the gates of hell if I had to. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the alley, keeping my distance, but keeping the black taillights of the Lincoln in my sights. I had told my wife I was leaving to test her loyalty. I never expected to find out she had already buried me and replaced me with a ghost. The hunt was on. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Whoever Mrs. Vanderbilt was, she was about to meet her husband. The Lincoln Continental merged onto the interstate heading north, and I pushed my old Ford to keep up. The speedometer needle wobbled around 70 miles per hour, and the engine whined in protest. My truck was not built for high-speed chases. It was built for hauling lumber and bags of cement to construction sites. But today it was hauling a broken man chasing a ghost. I kept 3 cars between us just like I had seen in movies. I was terrified that she would turn around and see the rusted grill of the truck she despised so much in her rear window. But she never looked back. Why would she? Mrs. Vanderbilt does not look back at the peasants. As we settled into the rhythm of the highway, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a burning confusion that quickly hardened into anger. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my hands began to cramp. I looked at the black car ahead of me gliding effortlessly over the asphalt, and my mind flashed back to the kitchen table just 3 days ago. Beatrice had been sitting there with the weekly grocery circular spread out in front of her. She had a red pen in her hand circling coupons for canned soup and discount toilet paper. She had looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Tom," she had said, her voice cracking, "the price of eggs has gone up another 50 cents. We have to cut back. I do not think we can afford meat this week, maybe just rice and beans again." I had felt so guilty. I felt like a failure of a husband because I could not provide my wife with a simple carton of eggs without her worrying about the electric bill. I went into the bathroom that night and cut my blood pressure pills in half just to make the bottle last longer. I skipped lunch for 2 days so I could put $20 in her purse while she was sleeping. I thought I was sacrificing for our survival. I thought we were in a lifeboat together bailing water to keep from sinking. But now, as I watched that luxury car weave through traffic, I realized I was the only one in the lifeboat. Beatrice was on a yacht. The injustice of it made my vision blur. She had me counting pennies while she was spending thousands. She made me feel small. She made me feel weak. And all the while, she was hoarding a secret life funded by money I did not know existed. Where did it come from? Was it my money? Was she stealing from our retirement? Or was there someone else paying for the silk dress and the chauffeur? The thought made my stomach turn over. The sign for Charlotte appeared overhead. We had been driving for nearly 2 hours. My back was aching from the worn-out seat, and the cabin of the truck was sweltering because the air conditioning compressor died last summer, and Beatrice said it was too expensive to fix. I rolled down the window, letting the hot rush of highway air blast me in the face, trying to stay alert. The Lincoln showed no signs of slowing down. It stayed in the fast lane, eating up the miles. Suddenly, the brake lights on the Lincoln flared red. We were hitting the morning congestion near the city limits. Traffic slowed to a crawl. This was the most dangerous part. If we got stuck bumper to bumper, she might spot me. I changed lanes, putting a delivery van between us, trying to stay hidden, but keeping the black roof of her car in sight. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. It was a text message from Beatrice. "I hope you are making good time to Florida. I am just heading to the pharmacy to pick up my arthritis cream. Miss you already." Love B. I stared at the screen, and then I looked at the Lincoln 50 yards ahead of me. She was texting me lies from the back seat of a limousine while I breathed in exhaust fumes chasing her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was not just a liar, she was a professional. She played the part of the frail old woman so well that I had never once questioned it. Arthritis cream. She was probably reapplying her lipstick right now, checking her reflection in a compact mirror I had never seen. The traffic started to break up as we approached the toll plaza. The Lincoln moved into the express lane, the one for drivers with electronic passes. I did not have a pass. I fumbled in the cup holder for loose change, my heart jumping into my throat. If I got stuck at the manual booth, I would lose her. The Lincoln accelerated through the sensor. I saw the gate arm lift, and the car shot forward. I looked at the lanes. The manual lane had a line of 3 cars. I made a split-second decision. I swerved into the express lane behind the Lincoln. I did not have a transponder. I knew a camera would snap a picture of my license plate and send me a fine in the mail. I did not care. Let them find me. Let them send the ticket to the house. I stepped on the gas and roared through the electronic lane just as the light turned red, signaling a violation. A siren chirped briefly behind me, but I kept going. I pushed the old Ford as hard as it would go, the engine temperature gauge creeping toward the red zone. I could not lose her now, not after coming this far. We navigated through the complex web of overpasses and exits that surround Charlotte. The Lincoln took exit 34, heading toward the south side of the city. I knew this area. This was not where regular folks lived. This was where the bankers and the developers and the old money families had their estates. The houses here were not houses, they were mansions sitting on acres of manicured land hidden behind high walls and iron gates. The road narrowed, winding through a tunnel of ancient oak trees. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a dappled pattern on the hood of my truck. It was beautiful and quiet and smelled of money. My truck sounded like a tractor in a library. I hung back, increasing the distance, hoping the noise of my muffler would not give me away. Ahead, the road ended at a massive stone archway. It looked like the entrance to a castle. Wrought iron gates twice the height of a man barred the way. A stone guardhouse stood in the center, manned by a security officer in a uniform that looked sharper than my Sunday best. A brass plaque, embedded in the stone wall, read Royal Oaks, private property, residents and guests only. I watched as the Lincoln slowed to a stop. The driver rolled down his window. He did not even have to show an ID. The guard simply nodded, smiling familiarly, and pressed a button. The heavy iron gates swung open silently. The Lincoln glided through, and the gates began to close immediately behind it. Panic surged through me. I slammed on the accelerator, closing the gap, but I was too late. The gates shut with a heavy metallic clang that echoed in the silence. I slammed on my brakes, skidding to a halt, just inches from the iron bars. Dust swirled around my tires. I sat there panting, staring through the bars as the black car disappeared around a bend in the pristine landscaping. I was locked out. The security guard stepped out of his booth. He walked toward my truck, his hand resting on his belt, not near a weapon, but with an air of authority that said he knew I did not belong here. He looked at my faded paint, my dented bumper, and then he looked at me. His expression was not angry, it was dismissive. It was the look you give to a stray dog that has wandered onto the porch. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his tone polite but firm. "This is a restricted community." I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. I could not tell him I was chasing my wife. He would think I was crazy. I could not tell him I was Mrs. Vanderbilt husband. He would laugh in my face. I looked past him at the winding road where Beatrice had vanished. She was in there somewhere, entering a world I was never meant to see. "I am looking for a delivery entrance," I lied, my voice raspy. "I have a package for Mrs. Vanderbilt." The guard raised an eyebrow. He looked at the empty passenger seat of my truck, then back at me. "We do not have any deliveries scheduled, sir, and all deliveries go through the service gate on the east side." You need to turn around. He did not believe me. He knew I was lying. Please, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. It is urgent. Turn around, sir, the guard repeated, stepping closer. Or I will have to call the police. I stared at him for a long second, measuring my options. There were none. I could not ram the gate. I could not fight him. I put the truck in reverse, my face burning with humiliation. I backed up, turning the truck around on the narrow road. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The guard was writing down my license plate number. I drove until I was out of sight of the gate, then pulled onto the shoulder of the road. I killed the engine and slammed my fist against the dashboard. I screamed, a sound of pure frustration that tore at my throat. I was so close. I knew where she was, but I could not get to her. Royal Oaks was a fortress. It was designed to keep people like me out. But I am an engineer. I solve problems for a living. I look at a structure and I find the weak point. I find the stress fracture. I find the way in. I pulled out my phone. I needed help. I needed someone who knew how to see things that were hidden. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Lucas. He was a kid I used to work with years ago, a brilliant young man who was good with computers and even better with gadgets. He owed me a favor. I hit the call button. Lucas, I said when he answered, I need you to meet me. Bring your drone. We are going to break into a fortress. I looked back towards the tree line that hid the mansions of Royal Oaks. Beatrice thought she was safe behind those walls. She thought her secret was locked away in a gated paradise. She was wrong. I was not going to knock on the front door. I was going to fly over the walls, and I was going to see exactly what Mrs. Vanderbilt was doing inside. I drove around the perimeter of the Royal Oaks community looking for a blind spot. The stone wall stretched for miles, topped with security cameras and motion sensors that blinked with a menacing red light. It was an impenetrable fortress designed to keep the reality of the world out and the fantasy of the wealthy safe inside. I found a dirt access road that ran parallel to the north wall, shielded by a dense line of pine trees. It was a service path for the power lines, a strip of mud and gravel that looked like it had not seen a vehicle in months. I parked my truck deep in the shadows of the pines and killed the engine. I checked my watch. It had been 20 minutes since I called Lucas. He was a good kid. I hired him fresh out of technical college 10 years ago when nobody else would give him a chance because of a juvenile record. I taught him discipline, and he taught me that computers were not just typewriters with screens. He had moved on to a high-paying cybersecurity job, but he never forgot who gave him his start. A cloud of dust announced his arrival. His beat-up Subaru Impreza slid to a halt next to my truck. Lucas jumped out wearing a hoodie and carrying a heavy hard shell case that looked like military equipment. He did not ask questions. He took one look at my face, the sweat on my forehead, the shaking of my hands, and he knew this was serious. Mr. Bennett, he said, popping the latches on the case. You look like you have seen a ghost. I am chasing one, Lucas, I replied, my voice grim. I need eyes over that wall. Can you do it? He grinned, a sharp, confident smile. I can get eyes on the moon if you want. This is a customized quadcopter with a 4K zoom lens and a directional parabolic microphone. It is not exactly legal to fly over private property, but for you I will risk a misdemeanor. He set the drone on the hood of my truck. It looked like a giant mechanical insect, sleek and black, with rotors that unfolded with a satisfying click. He powered up a controller that had a screen the size of a tablet attached to it. The rotors spun to life with a high-pitched whine that cut through the silence of the woods. I watched as the drone lifted off. It rose straight up, clearing the tops of the pine trees in seconds. Lucas manipulated the joysticks with the dexterity of a surgeon. On the screen, I saw the view from the camera. First the treetops, then the gray line of the security wall, and then the world inside. It was breathtaking. From the air, Royal Oaks looked less like a neighborhood and more like a resort. The lawns were a vibrant, unnatural green manicured into geometric patterns. Swimming pools sparkled like sapphires in the afternoon sun. Tennis courts and fountains dotted the landscape. It was a paradise built on money. "Follow the main road," I instructed, pointing at the screen. She was in a black Lincoln. Lucas nodded and pushed the drone forward. We flew over mansions that must have cost $5 or $6 million apiece. I felt a pang of bitterness. Beatrice and I argued over buying name-brand cereal, and here she was disappearing into a world where people probably spent more on pool maintenance than I made in a year. "There," I said, tapping the glass. "That is the car." We saw the black Lincoln parked in the circular driveway of one of the largest estates in the community. It was a sprawling white colonial mansion with massive pillars and a slate roof. The grounds were immense. There was a formal garden in the back, complete with white tents set up for an event. Lucas hovered the drone, lowering it carefully until we had a clear view of the backyard. The camera auto-focused, sharpening the image until it felt like we were standing right there. It was a garden party. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd with silver trays. Women in pastel dresses and wide-brimmed hats laughed and sipped champagne. Men in linen suits smoked cigars near a koi pond. It looked like a scene from a movie, something totally disconnected from my reality of radiator leaks and coupon clipping. And then I saw her. "Zoom in," I commanded, my heart slamming against my ribs. Right there by the rose bushes. The camera zoomed. The image stabilized. It was Beatrice. She was holding a crystal flute of champagne. She threw her head back and laughed at something a woman next to her said. It was a free, unburdened laugh. She looked relaxed. She looked like she belonged there. She gestured with her hand, and the sunlight caught the sparkle of a diamond bracelet on her wrist. I stared at that bracelet. It was thick, encrusted with stones. That single piece of jewelry could have paid off our mortgage. "Who is she?" Lucas asked quietly, sensing the tension radiating off me. "That is my wife," I whispered. "That is Beatrice." Lucas looked from the screen to me and back again. His eyes widened. "But Mr. Bennett, you said she was visiting your sick sister. You are supposed to be in Florida." "She lied, Lucas. She lied about everything." On the screen, the crowd parted. A man walked toward Beatrice. He was tall, with silver hair and a tan that spoke of winters spent on tropical islands. He wore a navy blazer with gold buttons. He walked with an air of ownership, like a man who was used to controlling everything in his orbit. This was Bill Anderson. I recognized him from the newspaper. He was a real estate mogul, a philanthropist, a man who had his name on half the buildings in downtown Charlotte. He walked right up to Beatrice. He did not shake her hand. He did not wave. He stepped into her personal space with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. He placed a hand on the small of her back. Beatrice leaned into his touch. She looked up at him with adoring eyes, eyes that used to look at me that way 40 years ago. Bill Anderson leaned down and kissed her on the cheek. It was not a friendly peck. It lingered. He whispered something in her ear, and she smiled, touching his arm gently. I felt like I was going to throw up. Seeing it was different than suspecting it. The betrayal was visceral. It was a physical blow. Lucas looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight. "Do you want to hear them?" he asked. "I can drop the altitude and activate the directional mic. The wind is low. We should get clear audio." "Do it," I said. "I need to hear it." The drone descended. It hovered about 50 feet above their heads, silent and menacing. Lucas adjusted some dials on the controller. The static on the speakers cleared, replaced by the ambient noise of the party, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation. A string quartet playing softly in the background. Lucas isolated the audio, focusing the microphone directly on the couple. Their voices cut through the background noise, clear and sharp. "You look radiant today, my dear," Bill Anderson said. His voice was deep smooth like expensive bourbon. I was worried you might not make it back in time. Beatrice sighed a sound that was picked up perfectly by the microphone. She looked up at him with a tragic expression, a mask of sorrow that I had seen her practice in the mirror without knowing what it was for. I had to go, William, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Today is the anniversary. I could not let it pass without visiting him. Visiting who? Bill asked, gently stroking her arm. My late husband, Beatrice said. She paused, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. I went to the cemetery this morning. Poor Thomas. It has been 3 years since the heart attack took him, but sometimes it feels like just yesterday. I still miss him, you know, even though I have found happiness with you. I stopped breathing. The world tilted on its axis. I stood there in the dirt next to my truck, staring at the screen, listening to my wife tell another man that I was dead. Not just dead, but dead for 3 years. She had killed me off. She had buried me in a fictitious grave and mourned me while I was sitting at home eating dinner across the table from her. The audacity of the lie was so massive it was almost impressive. She had turned me into a tragic backstory. I was the beloved deceased husband, the prop she used to garner sympathy, to explain her unavailability, to make herself seem like a woman of depth and loyalty. Bill Anderson pulled her into a hug, comforting the grieving widow. You are a saint, Beatrice, he said. To honor his memory like that. He was a lucky man to have you. I felt a cold rage spread through my veins, turning my blood to ice. I was not lucky. I was a ghost. I was a dead man, watching his own funeral from the sky. Bring it back, Lucas, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I have heard enough. Lucas guided the drone back toward us, but I kept my eyes on the screen, watching the image of my wife in the arms of a billionaire until the signal began to fade. She had erased me. She had stolen my life, my identity, and my dignity. But Mrs. Vanderbilt made a mistake. She forgot to check if the corpse was actually cold. I was very much alive. And as the drone touched down on the hood of my truck, I knew one thing for certain. The grieving widow was about to get the shock of her life. I sat in the cab of my truck and pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the steady thump, thump, thump of my heart. It was beating fast and hard, driven by adrenaline and rage, but it was definitely beating. I was alive. I was breathing the humid air. I could feel the steering wheel under my palms. But according to my wife, I had been a corpse for 3 years. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. 3 years ago, I did have a scare. It was a mild myocardial infarction, a warning shot from decades of stress and cheap food. I spent 3 days in the cardiac unit at Mercy General. Beatrice had sat by my bedside, holding my hand, looking pale and worried. I thought she was terrified of losing me. I thought she was contemplating a future without her partner. Now I knew she was auditioning for the role of the grieving widow. She was taking notes. She was memorizing the medical jargon the doctor used so she could repeat it later to a billionaire at a garden party to explain why she was single. She took the most vulnerable moment of my life and turned it into a backstory for her con. I told Lucas to pack up. I needed to be alone. I drove away from those walls of Royal Oaks, leaving my wife to play her part in that fantasy world, while I returned to the gritty reality of ours. I did not drive back to the alley. I drove straight to our house. The fear of getting caught was gone, replaced by a cold, analytical need for evidence. An engineer does not make a claim without data. I had the visual confirmation, but now I needed the paper trail. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it had at dawn, peeling paint, overgrown hydrangeas, the shutter hanging loose on the second-floor window. It looked like the home of a struggling couple, but now I saw it for what it really was. It was a stage set, a prop. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silence. The smell of old coffee and lavender air freshener hit me. It used to smell like home. Now it smelled like deceit. I walked straight to the back of the house to the small room Beatrice called her study. She always kept the door locked, claiming she needed privacy to balance our checkbook and pray. I had respected that privacy for years. I had thought she was in there stressing over electric bills and grocery budgets, trying to make ends meet for us. I tried the knob. Locked. Of course. I went to the garage and grabbed a thin flathead screwdriver and a stiff piece of wire. I am good with my hands. I have fixed engines, built decks, and rewired houses. A simple interior door lock was not going to stop me. I worked the mechanism, feeling the tumblers click into place. It took less than 10 seconds. The lock yielded with a soft snap, and the door swung open. The room was suffocatingly neat. There was no clutter, no piles of unpaid bills like I expected. A small desk sat in the corner with a laptop that was powered down. I opened the drawers. Nothing. Just pens, paper clips, and a Bible. It was too clean. It was sterile. I started checking the usual hiding spots. I ran my hand under the desk surface. Smooth. I checked behind the framed picture of Jesus on the wall. Nothing. I lifted the rug. Just dust. I stood in the center of the room, scanning the space. Beatrice was organized, but she was also a creature of habit. My eyes landed on the bookshelf. It was filled with cheap romance novels and cookbooks. But on the bottom shelf, tucked behind a row of oversized binders, was a small decorative ceramic box shaped like a turtle. It was something our granddaughter had painted for her years ago. Beatrice never let anyone touch it. I picked it up. It rattled. I removed the lid. Inside there was no jewelry, no cash, just a single small brass key. It had a number stamped on it. 402. And a tag with a zip code. I knew that zip code. It was for the main post office downtown, not the local branch we used. Why would she have a box downtown miles away from our house? I pocketed the key and ran out to the truck. I drove like a man possessed, weaving through the afternoon traffic. The post office was an old brick building with a smell of paper and glue. I walked into the lobby, scanning the walls of brass boxes. Box 402 was near the bottom. I inserted the key. It turned smoothly, but the small door would not open. It was jammed. I peered through the little glass window. The box was stuffed so full of mail that the envelopes were wedged against the door, preventing the latch from releasing. It was overflowing. I cursed under my breath. I could force it, but that might attract attention. I needed help. I walked up to the counter. The clerk was a tired-looking woman with reading glasses on a chain. "I need to pick up the mail for box 402, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My wife lost her key and the box is jammed anyway." She looked at me over her glasses. "I need ID, and I need you to sign the release form if you are not the primary box holder." My heart skipped a beat. The box was almost certainly in Beatrice's name. If I showed my ID, it would not match. But I remembered something. Years ago, when Beatrice broke her wrist, I used to sign checks and documents for her. I had practiced her signature until I could do it with my eyes closed. It was a loopier, more elegant version of her handwriting. "My wife, Beatrice Bennett, is the holder," I said. "I am her husband, Thomas. She sent me down here because her arthritis is flaring up. She called ahead, I think." I was gambling. I was gambling that this clerk was overworked and underpaid and did not care enough to check the system for a phone note. The clerk sighed and pushed a clipboard toward me. "Sign here. Print your name below." I picked up the pen. I took a breath and signed Beatrice Bennett with the flourish I knew so well. It looked perfect. I printed my own name underneath. She glanced at the clipboard, then at me. "Wait here." She disappeared into the back. The seconds ticked by like hours. I sweated in the air-conditioned room, expecting security to come out and handcuff me. Had she checked the signature card? Did she know? The clerk returned carrying a yellow plastic bin. She dumped it on the counter. "You need to empty this more often," she said flatly. "It is a fire hazard." I mumbled a thank you and scooped the pile of mail into my arms. It was heavy. There were dozens of envelopes, thick, glossy ones. I walked out to the truck, threw the pile on the passenger seat, and locked the doors. My hands were trembling as I picked up the first envelope. It was heavy, made of expensive cream-colored paper. The return address was American Express, but it was not a standard offer for a credit card. It was a statement. I tore it open. Inside was a bill for an American Express Centurion card. The black card. The card you can only get by invitation if you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I looked at the name on the account. Thomas Bennett. My name. It was my name. I felt the blood drain from my face. I grabbed another envelope. Chase Sapphire Reserve. Thomas Bennett. Another one. Nordstrom. Neiman Marcus. Saks Fifth Avenue. All of them were high-end accounts and all of them were in my name. But then I looked at the billing address. It was not our address. It was not the rundown house with the peeling paint. The billing address, printed neatly at the top of the statement, was 1400 Royal Oaks Drive, Charlotte, NC. I stared at the address. I knew that street. I had just been flown over it by a drone. That was Bill Anderson Estate. She was using my name and my credit history, but she was sending the bills to the home of the man she was planning to marry. She was racking up debt in the name of her dead husband and hiding the evidence in a mansion I could not enter. I started opening them all frantically, tearing paper and throwing it on the floor. I needed to see the damage. I needed the total. I pulled out a notebook and a pen from the glove box. I started writing down the amount due from each statement. $12,400 to American Express, $8,600 to Chase, $4,200 to a luxury spa, $15,000 for a jewelry store in downtown Charlotte. The numbers blurred. My hand cramped as I added them up. She had bought designer gowns. She had paid for limo services. She had bought vintage wines. She had even charged the catering deposit for a party, presumably the one I had just watched from the sky. I tallied the final column. I stared at the figure and felt like I was going to pass out. $150,000, $1,000. $150,000 of debt. All in the name of Thomas Bennett. I dropped the pen. The notebook slid off my lap. Beatrice had not just killed me off socially. She was financially assassinating me. She was building a dowry for her new life by destroying the remnants of her old one. She was going to marry a billionaire and leave me buried under a mountain of debt I could never repay in 10 lifetimes. I looked at the pile of envelopes, the physical proof of my ruin. I touched my chest again. My heart was still beating, but it felt heavier now, burdened by a weight that concrete and steel could never equal. I was not just a ghost. I was a scapegoat, and the woman I loved was the butcher. I sat in my truck for another 20 minutes, staring at the credit card statements until the numbers started to swim before my eyes. $150,000 in consumer debt was a mountain that would take me the rest of my life to climb, but my gut told me this was just the tip of the iceberg. Beatrice was meticulous. She was playing a high-stakes game, and you do not play at the billionaire table with just a few credit cards. You need capital. You need liquidity. I pulled out my phone and dialed Richard Stone. Richard has been my lawyer for 15 years, mostly handling simple things, like my will and the property deed, but he was a shark when he needed to be. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with smoke and impatience, but it softened the moment he heard the panic in my tone. I told him I needed to see him immediately. I told him it was an emergency involving fraud and potentially millions of dollars. He told me to come straight to his office downtown. I drove to the city center, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the black Lincoln following me. But nobody was following me. To Beatrice, I was in Florida. To Beatrice, I was a non-entity, a solved problem, a dead man walking. I parked the truck in a garage that cost $20 an hour, a price that would have made me wince yesterday, but today money felt like a meaningless abstraction. Richard's office was on the 12th floor of a brick building that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. He met me at the door. He is a short man with a bulldog face and eyes that do not miss a trick. He took one look at the stack of envelopes in my hand and poured me a glass of whiskey without asking. "Sit down, Tom," he said. "Tell me everything." I told him. I told him about the receipt, the Lincoln, the drone flight over Royal Oaks, and the conversation I heard between my wife and Bill Anderson. I showed him the credit card bills addressed to the mansion. Richard listened in silence, his face hardening like concrete setting in a mold. When I finished, he did not offer pity. He turned to his computer. "We need to check the big assets, Tom," he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Credit cards are bad, but they are unsecured debt. If she is playing a long con, she needs access to real equity. We need to check the title on your house." My stomach dropped. The house was everything. It was the only thing of real value we owned. We had paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. It was our retirement plan. It was the legacy I wanted to leave to my children, if we ever had any, or to my nieces and nephews. Richard clicked the mouse. He frowned. He clicked again. Then he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Tom," he said quietly, "when was the last time you signed a document at the bank?" "I have not been to the bank in years," I said. "Beatrice handles the accounts. She says I am too slow with the online banking." Richard turned the monitor toward me. "Look at this." I leaned forward. It was a digital record from the county clerk office. It showed a lien against my property, a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. The amount was $485,000. The date was 6 months ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was nearly the entire value of the house. In this market, with the neighborhood improving, our home was worth maybe $550,000. She had leveraged it to the hilt. She had stripped the equity out of the walls and the floorboards. I did not sign that, I whispered. I never signed that. Richard pulled up the scanned document. There at the bottom of the page was my signature. Thomas Bennett. It looked exactly like my handwriting. It had the same slant, the same loop on the B, but I knew I had not written it. Beatrice had forged my name. She had practiced it for 40 years on birthday cards and school permission slips and tax returns. She knew my hand better than I did. She stole the house, I said, my voice trembling. She stole the roof over our heads. It made sense now. The terrified logic of it all fell into place like the tumblers of a lock. Beatrice needed to transform herself. She needed a wardrobe that screamed old money. She needed to hire a limousine service on retainer. She needed to stay in luxury hotels in Memphis to build her cover story. You cannot do that with a Social Security check. You need $500,000 in cash. She used the house to fund her audition. She invested our entire life savings into becoming Mrs. Vanderbilt so she could land a whale like Bill Anderson. It was a cold, calculated investment. She was betting everything on this marriage. Once she married Bill, she would have access to his millions. She could pay off the HELOC before I ever found out. Or maybe she planned to just let the bank foreclose and kick me out onto the street. After all, I was supposed to be dead. Dead men do not need houses. Richard was already on the phone with his contact at the bank. He was speaking in low, urgent tones, using words like fraud affidavit and immediate freeze. I sat there staring at the screen, staring at the digital evidence of my ruin. I felt like a fool. I had been eating rice and beans to save money, while she was siphoning $500,000 out of our home equity. Every time she complained about the price of gas, every time she refused to turn on the heat, she was laughing at me. She was hoarding the cash for her grand debut. Richard hung up the phone. His face was grim. "We have a problem, Tom. A big one. The bank confirmed the loan is active. The money is sitting in a holding account linked to the mortgage. But there is activity pending." "What kind of activity?" I asked. "A wire transfer," Richard said. "It was initiated yesterday. It is scheduled to clear on Monday morning." "How much?" $400,000. "Where is it going?" Richard looked at his notes. "It is going to the Anderson Family Charity Foundation." The room spun. Of course. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Beatrice was not just trying to marry Bill Anderson, she was trying to buy him. She knew that men like Bill do not marry women who are destitute. They marry equals, or at least women who appear to be equals. She was going to make a massive donation to his charity. She was going to present herself as a philanthropist, a wealthy widow who wanted to give back. It was the ultimate power move. It would cement her status in his world. It would prove she was Mrs. Vanderbilt. And she was doing it with my money. She was going to donate the equity of my house to her new boyfriend, his charity, to seal the deal on their wedding. My phone rang. The sound was loud and jarring in the quiet office. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. I usually do not answer those, but my nerves were shot. I pressed accept. "Hello, this is Thomas Bennett." "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett," a professional female voice said. "This is Sarah from First National Bank Security Department. We are calling to verify a large transaction on your home equity account. We noticed a recent update to your contact number and wanted to ensure this request is valid before the weekend processing." I looked at Richard. He nodded frantically, gesturing for me to play along. He needed me to get the details. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I am aware of the transaction. Can you just confirm the details for my records? I want to make sure it is going to the right place." "Certainly, sir," the woman said. "We have a wire transfer request for $400,000 payable to the Anderson Family Charity Foundation. The transfer is scheduled to execute at 9 a.m. on Monday. Do you authorize this transaction?" I gripped the phone. Monday at 9 a.m. Today was Friday afternoon. The banks were closing soon. If I stopped it now over the phone, Beatrice would know. She would get a notification that the transfer failed. She would know the gig was up. She would run. She would disappear, and I would never see a dime of that money again. I needed to catch her. I needed to stop the wedding. I needed to expose her in front of Bill Anderson, so she could never do this to anyone else. I made a split-second decision. "There is a slight issue with the account number," I lied. "Put a temporary hold on it until I can come into the branch on Monday morning to sign the paperwork in person. Do not cancel it, just hold it." "Very well, Mr. Bennett," the woman said. "We will hold the transfer pending in-person verification. Have a good weekend." I hung up. I looked at Richard. "We have until Monday morning," I said. "She thinks the money is moving. She thinks she has bought her way into paradise." Richard leaned back in his chair. "You are playing a dangerous game, Tom. If that money moves, you will never get it back." "I know," I said, standing up. "But I am not just after the money anymore, Richard." She tried to erase me. She tried to steal my life. I am going to crash that wedding, and I am going to make sure that when she falls hard. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there in a mansion I could not afford. Beatrice was preparing for her big day. She was probably trying on a dress bought with my credit card, planning a future built on the ashes of my past. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought her husband was a simple engineer who could not see past his own nose. She was wrong. She forgot that engineers build things to last. And when we find a structural failure, we do not just patch it up, we tear it down. Monday morning was the deadline, but the wedding was tomorrow night. I had 24 hours to prepare. I had 24 hours to turn myself from a victim into a wrecking ball. Beatrice wanted a fairy tale ending. I was going to give her a horror story. It was Friday afternoon, and the city of Charlotte was winding down for the weekend. Office workers were loosening their ties and thinking about happy hour, but inside the cab of my truck, the air was thick with a suffocating pressure. I had stopped the immediate bleeding by stalling the bank transfer, but the wound was still wide open. $400,000 of my home equity was sitting in a digital limbo scheduled to fly out of my account at 9 o'clock Monday morning. If that money moved, I would lose everything. The house I built with my own hands, the financial security I had scraped together over 40 years. It would all be gone, donated to a charity in the name of a woman who did not exist. I sat in the parking garage and watched the people walking by. They looked so normal, so unburdened. I envied them. I looked at the imposing glass structure across the street. The Anderson Tower. It pierced the skyline, a monument to wealth and power. That was where Bill Anderson ruled his empire. And that was where I had to go. Confronting Beatrice was not an option. If I went to her, she would panic. She would deny it. She would run. Or worse, she would call Bill and spin some new lie about a stalker or a crazy relative trying to extort her. She was a master manipulator, and I was just an engineer. I could not beat her at her own game of emotional chess. I had to go to the source. I had to see the man she was buying. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My new suit was sharp. My haircut was fresh. I did not look like a retired man living on coupons anymore. I looked like a professional. I looked like a man who belonged in a boardroom. I grabbed my leather portfolio, the one I used to carry to site inspections 20 years ago, and stepped out of the truck. I walked across the street with a purpose. I was not Thomas Bennett, the husband. Today, I was Thomas Bennett, the structural engineer. I had spent 40 years analyzing load-bearing walls and calculating stress fractures. I knew how to talk the language of construction, and Bill Anderson was a developer. That was my way in. The lobby of the Anderson Tower was cold and smelled of expensive lilies. I walked straight to the security desk. I did not ask for permission. I told the guard I was there for a consultation on the riverfront project, a massive development I knew Bill was breaking ground on next month. It was a bluff, but it was an educated one. Developers are always worried about their foundations. The guard called up. I waited, my heart keeping a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. A few minutes later, he handed me a visitor badge. "Mr. Anderson has 10 minutes, he said. The elevator ride to the penthouse suite was smooth and silent. My ears popped as we ascended. When the doors opened, I stepped into a reception area that was bigger than my entire house. A young woman led me down a long corridor, lined with architectural models. At the end of the hall, double mahogany doors stood open. Bill Anderson was standing by the window looking out at the city he helped build. He turned as I entered. Up close, he looked older than he did from the drone feed. He had kind eyes, the kind of eyes that want to see the best in people. That was his weakness. That was how Beatrice had gotten in. "Mr. Bennett," he said, extending a hand. "My secretary tells me you have concerns about the soil density on the riverfront site. I did not know we had brought in an outside consultant." I shook his hand. His grip was firm. I felt a strange pang of guilt. I was shaking the hand of the man who was stealing my wife, but he did not know it. He was a victim in this just as much as I was, maybe more because he was about to marry a mirage. "I am an independent contractor, Mr. Anderson." I lied smoothly, falling back on the technical jargon that used to be my second language. I was reviewing the public geological surveys for the area. I noticed some discrepancies in the bedrock layers that your team might have overlooked. I thought a man of your reputation would want to know before pouring concrete. Bill listened intently. We spent 10 minutes talking about limestone deposits and water tables. I played the part perfectly. I showed him sketches I had drawn up in the car. I watched respect dawn in his eyes. He saw a peer. He saw a man who knew his business. "You have a sharp eye, Tom," he said, relaxing his posture. "Most engineers would have missed that. You saved me a potential headache down the road." I shrugged. "I believe in building things to last, Bill. If the foundation is a lie, the whole structure comes down eventually." He nodded solemnly. "That is a philosophy I try to live by. Honesty. Integrity. It is rare these days." The word honesty hung in the air between us. It was the opening I needed. I closed my portfolio and sat back in the leather chair. "It sounds like you value transparency," I said. "That is good. It must be hard to find people you can trust, especially in your position. People who want you for you and not for what you can give them." Bill sighed and walked over to a small bar cart in the corner. He poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and handed one to me. "You have no idea, Tom. I have spent my life guarding my wallet. I have been married twice before. Both times it ended with lawyers and settlements. I had almost given up on finding something real." He took a sip of water, and a softness came into his face, a look of vulnerability that made my stomach twist. "But I got lucky," he continued. "I finally found her. A woman who does not care about the buildings or the bank accounts. A woman who has her own tragedy, her own depth." I gripped the cold glass of water. "Beatrice?" I asked, knowing the answer. He smiled. "Beatrice, yes. Mrs. Vanderbilt, though she hates that name. She only uses it because of her late husband family connections. She is a widow, you know. Her husband died 3 years ago. A massive heart attack." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to keep breathing evenly. A heart attack. That must have been devastating. "It broke her," Bill said, his voice full of sympathy. "She told me she spent a year just sitting in the dark, waiting to die herself. But she is strong. She is a survivor. And she is so generous, Tom. You would not believe the size of her heart." I took a sip of water to hide the grimace that threatened to twist my face. "I bet she is," I said. "She is a saint," Bill declared. He walked back to his desk and picked up a framed photo. He turned it toward me. It was Beatrice. She was wearing a white dress standing on the deck of a yacht, the wind blowing through her hair. She looked like a woman without a care in the world. "Do you know what she did yesterday?" Bill asked, his eyes shining with admiration. "She came into this office and handed me a check for $400,000. The number hit me like a physical slap. $400,000. My money. The equity from the home where we raised our children. The safety net for my old age. She told me it was the proceeds from selling her late husband's jewelry collection," Bill continued. "She said she could not bear to look at the diamonds anymore. She wanted the money to go to something good. She donated it all to my family foundation to build a new wing at the pediatric hospital." I felt a wave of nausea. She had turned the theft of my home into a charitable tax write-off. She had sold my future to buy her sainthood. "That is incredibly generous," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "I told her I did not need her money," Bill said. "I told her I have plenty. But she insisted. She said she wanted to come into our marriage as an equal. She did not want to be a burden. Can you imagine that, Tom? A woman selling her past to build a future with me. That is when I knew I could not wait any longer." He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret. "We were supposed to get married in the spring in Paris. But after that gesture, I realized why wait. We are not young. Time is precious. So I made a decision." He looked at me with a conspiratorial grin. "We are doing it tomorrow night. Right here in Charlotte, at my estate. A private ceremony, just close friends and family. It is going to be a surprise for her, actually. She thinks it is just an engagement party, but I have the priest and the license ready. We are going to tie the knot under the stars. The room seemed to tilt. Tomorrow night, Saturday. I had assumed the wire transfer on Monday was the deadline. I thought I had time to formulate a plan to gather more evidence, but I was wrong. The transfer was just the final payment, the entry fee. The real event, the point of no return, was happening in less than 24 hours. If Beatrice married Bill Anderson tomorrow night, she would be committing a felony. Bigamy. But more than that, she would disappear. Once she was Mrs. Anderson, she would be behind walls I could never breach again. She would have access to resources that could bury me. She would use Bill lawyers to fight the bank fraud. She would claim I was the liar, the abusive ex-husband who refused to let go. She would spin the narrative, and with Bill money behind her, she would win. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was razor sharp. "Congratulations, Bill," I said, extending my hand again. "She sounds one of a kind." "She is, Tom. She really is. You should come by if you are free. I know we just met, but I have a feeling you understand what it is like to build things. I would love for you to meet her." I shook his hand. The irony was so thick I could taste it like blood in my mouth. "I would not miss it for the world," I said. I walked out of the office and down the long corridor. I kept my stride steady, my face calm. I nodded to the secretary. I waited for the elevator. But inside I was screaming. I stepped out of the building into the cooling evening air. The city lights were coming on. Saturday night. Tomorrow. Beatrice was going to stand in front of a priest and pledge her life to another man while I was still legally her husband. She was going to use the money she stole from our life together to buy her way into paradise. I walked to my truck and threw the portfolio on the seat. I did not need geological surveys anymore. I did not need structural analysis. I needed a wrecking ball. I called Richard Stone. "Change of plans." "Richard," I said as soon as he answered. "We are not waiting for Monday." "What happened, Tom?" he asked, sensing the steel in my voice. "The wedding is tomorrow night," I said, "and I just got invited." I looked at the phone in my hand. Then I pulled up the text message thread with Beatrice. Her last message from 2 hours ago read, "Good night, honey. Going to bed early. This arthritis is killing me. Pray for me." I typed a reply. My thumbs hit the screen with force. "Sleep well, Beatrice. I have a surprise for you. See you soon." I hit send. I was not going to stop the wire transfer. I was not going to call the police. Not yet. I was going to let her walk down that aisle. I was going to let her get all the way to the altar. I was going to let her think she had won. And then I was going to burn her fantasy to the ground. I left the Anderson Tower with the weight of the secret pressing against my ribs like a physical stone. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the luxury cars glide by, and fighting the urge to turn around and storm back into the penthouse. It would have been so easy to just tell Bill right then and there, "Your fiancée is my wife." But I stopped myself. I am an engineer, and I know how structures work. If you strike a reinforced wall with a hammer, you just chip the paint. Bill Anderson was a man protected by layers of money and influence. He was infatuated. He believed Beatrice was a saint who had sold her jewelry for charity. If a stranger in a cheap suit walked into his office and claimed his angel was a fraud, he would not see the truth. He would see a jealous ex or a con artist trying to shake him down. He would call security. He would call Beatrice, and she would spin it. She would cry those perfect fake tears and say I was the stalker she had been warned about. She would win. No. I could not just tell him. I had to show him. I needed to present a case so airtight, so undeniable, that even a man blinded by love would be forced to see the cracks. I drove straight to Richard Stone's office. It was getting late. The city lights were blurring in the twilight, but my mind was crystal clear. I called Lucas on the way. "Meet us at the law firm," I said. "Bring everything." We turned Richard's conference room into a war room. The large mahogany table usually reserved for signing wills and closings became the assembly line for Beatrice's destruction. Richard handled the legal framework. He pulled the original certified copy of our marriage license from his safe. It was dated May 12, 1975. It was yellowed with age, but the seal was raised and valid. There was no divorce decree. There was no death certificate. Just a legally binding contract that stated Beatrice Bennett was still very much married to Thomas Bennett. Next to it, Richard placed the sworn affidavit I had signed earlier that day. "I, Thomas Bennett, being of sound mind and body, attest that I am alive." It sounded ridiculous that a man has to prove he exists, but that was the game she had forced me to play. Then came the financial forensics. This was where the knife twisted. Richard laid out the home equity line of credit agreement. We put it under a magnifying lamp. Thomas Bennett. The signature at the bottom was a masterpiece of forgery. It had the right slant, the right loop on the B. But Richard pulled a deed I had actually signed 10 years ago and placed them side by side. "Look at the pressure points," Richard said, pointing with a pen. "Here on the T, it is too heavy, and here at the end of the name there is a hesitation mark." Someone paused to check their work. A man does not hesitate when signing his own name, Tom. This is a tracing. We added the forgery to the pile. Lucas arrived with his laptop and a portable printer. He was the final piece of the puzzle. He connected the drone's memory card and brought up the footage from the garden party. He froze the frame where Bill Anderson was kissing Beatrice's cheek. He zoomed in until their faces filled the screen. "I can clean up the audio too," Lucas said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I can isolate her voice saying the words, 'my late husband.'" "Do it," I said. "Burn it to a drive. I want Bill to hear her kill me with her own voice." Lucas worked his magic. He printed high-resolution stills of the party. He printed the credit card statements that showed the purchase of the diamond bracelet Beatrice was wearing in the video. He drew a red line from the bank transaction to the photo on her wrist. It was a roadmap of theft. By midnight, we had it. The destruction dossier. It was a thick black binder. Inside was the timeline of a crime. Page 1, the marriage certificate. Page 2, the mortgage fraud. Page 3, the credit card debt accrued at Bill's address. Page 4, the photos of the grieving widow drinking champagne. Page 5, the wire transfer request for the $400,000. It was not just evidence, it was a weapon. I tried to sleep on the leather couch in Richard's office, but my mind would not shut down. I kept seeing Beatrice's face. I kept hearing her lie to me about the price of eggs while she was planning a $1 million heist. Morning came slowly. The sun rose on Saturday, wedding day. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up expecting an alert from the bank or maybe a message from Lucas. But it was Beatrice. I stared at the name on the screen. My wife. I opened the text. It had been sent at 8:00 a.m. "Good morning, my love," the message read. "I miss you so much. The house is so empty without you here. It is just so sad and quiet. Please stay in Florida a few more days if your sister needs you. Do not rush back on my account. I will be fine, just praying for you both." I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my throat. The audacity was breathtaking. She was actively managing me. She wanted to make sure I stayed in my box in Florida while she committed a felony in Charlotte. The house is empty. Of course it was empty. She wasn't there. She was probably at the spa getting ready for her big night, or already at the estate preparing to become Mrs. Anderson. She was securing her perimeter. She wanted to make sure the dead husband didn't accidentally walk through the door. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I could almost see her checking her phone, smiling to herself, thinking she was the smartest person in the world. She thought I was a senile old fool who would believe anything she typed. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every letter. "Thank you, honey," I wrote. "You are too good to me. Do not worry about a thing. I have arranged a big surprise for you. It will arrive tomorrow night." I hit send. I watched the screen. 3 little dots appeared instantly. She was typing. Then they stopped. Then a single emoji popped up. A red heart. She had no idea. She probably thought I had ordered her flowers, or maybe a gift basket. She thought she had won. She thought the surprise was just another pathetic gesture from her gullible husband. She did not know that the surprise was me. I closed the phone and looked at Richard and Lucas. They were watching me. "Is it time?" Richard asked. I picked up the black binder. It felt heavy, solid. "It is time," I said. "Let's go to a wedding." I pulled up to the iron gates of the Royal Oaks estate at exactly 7:30 in the evening. The sun had set, leaving a bruised purple sky that matched the color of the mood inside the Lincoln town car Richard had hired. I was not driving my truck tonight. Tonight required armor. I was wearing my dark navy suit, the one I bought for our 25th anniversary 15 years ago. It was a little tight across the shoulders, but it was made of good wool, and it made me feel like the man I used to be before Beatrice slowly chipped away at my confidence. Sitting next to me was Richard Stone, clutching the black binder like a shield. In the front seat were 2 men who looked like linebackers in cheap suits. They were plainclothes detectives from the fraud division, officers Miller and Davis. They were there because when you steal $500,000 from a bank, the law tends to get involved. The line of cars waiting to enter the estate was impressive. Mercedes Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce. We were the only domestic sedan in the queue. I watched the brake lights flare red ahead of us, a river of rubies leading to the slaughter. My heart was not racing anymore. It had settled into a cold, steady rhythm. I was past fear. I was past sadness. I was in a place of pure, crystalline focus. We reached the checkpoint. A security guard in a uniform that cost more than my weekly food budget leaned into the window. He held a tablet with a digital guest list. "Name, please," he asked, looking at our car with a hint of disdain. "Thomas Bennett," I said. "And guests?" He tapped the screen. "I do not see a Bennett on the list, sir. This is a private event for the Anderson and Vanderbilt families." Of course not. Beatrice would never invite the corpse. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy cream-colored envelope Lucas had printed just 3 hours ago. It was a masterpiece of forgery. The cardstock was thick, the embossing was gold, and right in the center was a QR code that Lucas had hacked into the event server. "I believe there has been a mistake," I said, my voice smooth and arrogant. The voice of a man who belongs. "Scan this." It was a last-minute addition from the bride. The guard frowned, but he aimed the tablet at the card. The device beeped a cheerful green light. His eyes widened slightly. "My apologies, Mr. Bennett," the guard said, stepping back and waving us through. "Welcome to Royal Oaks." We drove up the winding driveway lined with lanterns that cast a soft golden glow on the manicured hedges. The house loomed ahead, a white palace glowing against the night. We parked near the fountain. I stepped out and buttoned my jacket. I checked the knot of my tie. Richard nodded to me, a silent signal that we were ready. The 2 detectives fell in behind us, blending in like private security. We walked up the grand staircase to the front doors, which stood open to the night. The sound of a string quartet drifted out, mixed with the murmur of polite conversation. Inside the main hall was transformed. It was a wonderland of white roses and crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and caviar. The guests were the elite of Charlotte, the people who owned the banks and the buildings. They stood in clusters, laughing and clinking glasses, oblivious to the fact that they were attending a crime scene. I moved through the crowd like a shark in a koi pond. I did not look at anyone. My eyes were scanning the room, searching for the center of gravity. And then I saw them. At the far end of the ballroom, a raised platform had been set up. An archway of white orchids framed the space. Bill Anderson stood there, looking handsome and nervous in a black tuxedo. He was beaming, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. He looked like a man who had won the lottery. And walking toward him, coming down the grand, spiraling staircase, was Beatrice. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a second, I forgot to breathe. She was breathtaking. She was wearing an ivory gown that shimmered under the lights, cut to flatter her figure in a way her old clothes never did. Her hair was piled high, adorned with pearls, but it was her neck that caught my eye. Around her throat sat a necklace of diamonds so large they looked like ice cubes. They caught the light and threw it back in dazzling fractured rainbows. Matching earrings hung from her ears, a bracelet coiled around her wrist. I did the math in my head. That was not just jewelry. That was my roof. That was my walls. That was the sweat of 40 years of labor hanging on her skin. She was wearing my life. She reached the bottom of the stairs. Bill stepped forward to meet her, taking her hand and kissing it. The crowd hushed. The string quartet stopped playing. A hush fell over the room, a reverent silence for the union of two fortunes. Beatrice looked around the room, her face glowing with triumph. She had done it. She had pulled off the con of the century. She was moments away from becoming Mrs. Bill Anderson and disappearing into a life of untouchable luxury. The officiant, a man in flowing robes, stepped up to the archway. He raised his hands. Friends and family. He began, his voice booming without a microphone. We are gathered here tonight, not just to celebrate an engagement, but to witness a union. Bill and Beatrice have decided that love cannot wait. They wish to exchange their vows right here, right now, under the eyes of God and their loved ones. A collective gasp of delight went through the room. Applause broke out. Beatrice simpered, pressing a hand to her chest in mock modesty. I started moving. I pushed past a woman in a red dress who spilled her wine. I ignored her glare. I kept my eyes locked on the altar. Richard and the detectives were right behind me, cutting a wake through the confused guests. The officiant smiled, waiting for the applause to die down. Beatrice, my dear, do you come here freely to give yourself to this man? Yes, Beatrice whispered loud enough for the front rows to hear. Oh, yes. And do you, Bill, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife to cherish and protect from this day forward? I do, Bill said, his voice thick with emotion. The officiant nodded. Then if there is anyone present who knows just cause why this couple may not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. It is the part of the wedding everyone expects to pass in silence. It is a formality, a relic. The room was quiet. Beatrice smiled up at Bill, confident in her victory. I stepped onto the edge of the platform. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand of the lead singer of the band, who was standing just to the right of the altar. The feedback squealed a high, piercing shriek that made everyone wince. Hold on, I said, my voice booming through the massive speakers echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Beatrice's head snapped toward me. Her eyes went wide, huge saucers of panic. Her face drained of color, turning the same shade as her ivory dress. She looked like she had seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. I gripped the microphone stand, my knuckles white. I looked straight at her, ignoring the hundreds of shocked faces turning my way. I am afraid she cannot do that, I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. She cannot agree to marry you, Bill, because her husband is not dead. He is standing right here. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and heavy, like a blanket of lead had been dropped over the entire estate. 300 people stood frozen with their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths, staring at the man in the navy suit standing on the altar. The only sound was the hum of the amplifiers, and the distant chirp of crickets in the garden. Beatrice stared at me, and for a moment I saw the real her. Not the grieving widow, not the blushing bride, but the cornered animal. Her face, which had been flushed with triumph seconds ago, drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. She looked at Bill, then at the crowd, and finally back at me, with eyes full of pure, venomous terror. Then she screamed. It was a shrill, theatrical sound designed to shatter the tension and paint herself as the victim. "Security!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me, her diamond bracelets rattling against each other. "Get him out of here! Get this madman out of here right now! He is stalking me! He is obsessed with me! Please, somebody help me!" Two burly security guards started to move toward the stage, their hands reaching for my arms. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, because I knew I had the truth on my side, and truth is the heaviest anchor in the world. "Wait." The command came from Bill Anderson. It was sharp and authoritative, a voice used to commanding boardrooms and construction sites. He stepped away from Beatrice, holding up a hand to stop the guards. He squinted at me, his brow furrowed in confusion and recognition. He looked at my face, then at my suit, trying to reconcile the intruder with the professional he had met yesterday. "Hold on a minute," Bill said, his voice projecting clearly without the microphone. "I know this man. This is Mr. Bennett, the engineer I met yesterday." He turned to Beatrice, looking for an explanation. "Beatrice, honey, what is going on? You said you had a stalker, but this man sat in my office yesterday. He consulted on the riverfront project. Why is he here saying he is your husband?" Beatrice grabbed Bill's arm, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. She was desperate now, trying to physically pull him away from the truth. "He is lying, William," she sobbed, forcing tears to spill down her cheeks. "He is a crazy person. He used to fix our plumbing years ago, and he developed this sick fixation on me. He thinks he is Thomas. He thinks he is my late husband. Please, just make him leave. He is ruining our special day." It was a good lie. It was quick and dirty and plausible enough to work on a man who desperately wanted to believe her. Bill wavered, looking back at the guards. I took a step forward. I looked directly at my wife. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice calm and deadly. "You are very good at this, aren't you? You almost had me convinced I was crazy too. You told Bill that your husband died of a heart attack 3 years ago. Is that right?" She flinched as if I had slapped her. I turned to Bill. "I am sorry to disappoint you, Bill, but I did not die. I had a mild cardiac event 3 years ago, yes." Beatrice sat by my bedside at Mercy General. I thought she was praying for my recovery, but now I realized she was just rehearsing her backstory. She was waiting for me to flatline so she could cash in, but I survived. And she has been punishing me for it ever since. "My heart is beating just fine, Beatrice," I said, looking back at her. "It is beating strong enough to drive a truck from Charlotte to the bank, and strong enough to crash this party." The crowd murmured. The doubt was spreading like a virus. Beatrice looked around the room, realizing she was losing the audience. She realized that words were not enough anymore. She needed a bigger distraction. She let out a soft moan. Her hand fluttered to her forehead. "Oh, God," she whispered, her eyelids fluttering. I can't breathe." She collapsed. It was a graceful fall, a controlled descent that allowed her to land softly on the white carpet without ruining her dress. She lay there, eyes closed, chest heaving dramatically, playing the part of the fragile woman overcome by shock. Bill gasped and dropped to his knees beside her. "Beatrice," he cried, patting her cheek. "Somebody get a doctor. Call an ambulance." The guests surged forward, concerned whispers turning into panic. The officiant looked useless. For a second, it looked like she might get away with it. An ambulance would take her away from the confrontation. She would be the victim again, the poor woman attacked at her own wedding. But I was not going to let that happen. I did not move to help her. I did not show an ounce of concern. I knew exactly what she was doing because I had seen her do it a dozen times to get out of paying bills or visiting my family. "She is not sick, Bill," I said loud enough to be heard over the commotion. "She is acting, just like she has been acting for the last 3 years. "How dare you?" Bill roared, looking up at me with genuine anger. "Can't you see she is in distress? You did this to her." I reached out to Richard Stone, who was standing at the edge of the stage. He handed me the black binder, the destruction dossier. It was heavy in my hand, loaded with the paper trail of her crimes. I walked over to the table where the wedding cake stood, a towering confection of sugar and lies. I cleared a space, pushing aside crystal flutes and silver forks. "I am not the one who did this to her, Bill," I said. "Her greed did this. You think she is a saint. You think she saw and she sold her diamonds to help your charity." I raised the binder and slammed it down on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. The thud echoed through the ballroom, silencing the whispers, stopping the panic. Even Beatrice on the floor flinched, her eyes squeezing shut tighter, a telltale sign that she was conscious and listening to every word. "Look at it, Bill," I challenged him, pointing a shaking finger at the dossier. "Open it." Bill looked at Beatrice on the floor, then at the black binder. He hesitated. He wanted to protect her, but the businessman in him, the man who built skyscrapers based on facts and blueprints, could not ignore the evidence presented with such conviction. "What is this?" Bill asked, standing up slowly, dusting off his knees. "It is the receipt for your wedding present," I said. "That $400,000 she donated to your foundation. The money that made you want to marry her tonight. It did not come from selling jewelry. Beatrice does not have any jewelry, except what she bought with my credit cards last week." I took a step closer, my eyes locking with his. "That money came from a home equity line of credit on the house we have lived in for 30 years, my house. She forged my signature, Bill. She stole the equity from my home to buy her way into your heart. She is not a wealthy widow. She is a fraud who is currently $150,000 in debt to credit card companies, all under my name, and all billed to your address." Bill stared at me. The color drained from his face. He looked down at the woman on the floor, the woman he thought was an angel. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Beatrice, get up." She did not move. She lay there, committed to the performance, hoping that if she stayed still long enough, the nightmare would end. "Get up!" Bill shouted, his voice cracking with betrayal. The spell broke. Beatrice's eyes snapped open. She saw the look on his face. She saw the binder on the table. She scrambled to her feet, the elegance of the Vanderbilt persona vanishing, instantly replaced by the scrappy desperation of a cornered grifter. "He is lying." "William," she pleaded, grabbing his lapels. "He is trying to confuse you. I did it for us. I did it so we could be together." But Bill pulled away from her as if she were radioactive. He walked to the table and opened the binder. He saw the marriage certificate. He saw the bank statements with the forged signatures. He saw the photos from the drone showing her laughing with him while I watched from the sky. He turned the pages slowly, his hands shaking. The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone was watching the destruction of a fantasy. "It is all there, Bill," I said, my voice soft now, almost gentle. "She is not Mrs. Vanderbilt. She is Mrs. Bennett. And she has destroyed my life to become part of yours." Bill looked up from the documents. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set in stone. He looked at Beatrice, and for the first time he saw her clearly. He saw the costume. He saw the mask. Beatrice tried to speak, to spin one last web, but the sound of sirens cut through the night air, growing louder and louder, coming up the driveway. The police were here. And this time they were not coming for me. Bill Anderson stood there with the heavy black binder in his hands, staring at the pages as if they were written in a foreign language. But they were not foreign. They were the language of commerce, of debt, and of lies which a man in his position understood better than anyone. Richard Stone stepped forward from the shadows, his voice calm and professional, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Mr. Anderson," Richard said, gesturing to the open dossier, "what you are looking at is a forensic accounting of a crime. That HELOC agreement showing the withdrawal of $485,000 is dated 6 months ago. The signature at the bottom purports to be Thomas Bennett. However, we have a sworn affidavit from the notary public who witnessed it admitting he was bribed $2,000 by Mrs. Bennett to notarize a forged signature. The funds were then laundered through a series of transfers before ending up in the check she presented to you yesterday. It is not family money, sir. It is stolen equity." Bill looked up from the page. His face was gray. He looked at the woman standing beside him, the woman he had been ready to pledge his life to, and the adoration that had been there just moments ago was gone. It had evaporated instantly, replaced by a look of absolute revulsion. He looked at her the way you might look at a termite infestation you just discovered eating away at the foundation of your home. "You told me you were Mrs. Vanderbilt," Bill said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You told me you had properties in the Hamptons and a trust fund. You told me you were alone in this world." He threw the binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap that made the guests jump. "Is any of it true?" Bill demanded, stepping into her personal space. "Or is it all just debt? Is every stitch of clothing on your back, every diamond on your neck, just stolen money taken from this man you claimed was dead?" Beatrice stood there trembling. The tears she had summoned earlier dried up instantly. The mask of the fragile fainting flower slipped completely. She straightened her spine, but it was not the posture of a queen anymore. It was the stance of a street fighter realizing she has been backed into a dark alley. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who would buy the act, but she saw only disgusted faces. The game was up. The con had collapsed, and when a narcissist loses control, they do not apologize. They attack. "I did what I had to do," Beatrice spat, her voice changing completely. The soft, cultured accent she had used with Bill vanished, replaced by the sharp, bitter tone I had heard for 40 years in our kitchen. "What you had to do?" Bill asked, incredulous. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone in this room." "I had to!" She screamed, her face twisting into a snarl. She pointed a manicured finger at me, a finger adorned with a ring I now knew I would be paying for. "Because of him. Look at him. Look at that pathetic old man. He is a failure, Bill. He is a loser." She turned to the crowd, her arms widespread, the diamonds flashing under the chandeliers. "Do you people know what it is like?" she yelled, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Do you know what it is like to live with a man who counts the sheets of toilet paper? A man who refuses to turn on the heat in the winter until you can see your breath in the living room? I lived like a prisoner for 40 years. I scrimped and I saved and I clipped coupons while life passed me by." She turned back to me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. "I deserved better, Thomas. I am beautiful. I am smart. I deserved the life these people have. I deserved the champagne and the travel and the respect, and you were never going to give it to me. You were content to rot in that little box of a house until we died." She looked at Bill again, pleading now, but with a twisted logic that made my skin crawl. "I did it for us, William. I needed to get out. I needed to be someone worthy of you. He was dead weight. He was a stone around my neck. I just cut him loose so I could survive. Can't you see that?" The room gasped. It was the naked, ugly truth of her greed exposed for everyone to see. She did not see herself as a criminal. She saw herself as a victim who was entitled to commit crimes to get what she wanted. Bill took a step back, recoiling from her. "You are a monster," he whispered. Beatrice's eyes darted to the table. She saw the binder. She saw the evidence that was about to send her to prison. Panic flared in her eyes. "No," she shrieked. "You cannot do this. You cannot take this away from me." She lunged. She threw herself at the table, her hands clawing for the documents. She grabbed the binder, trying to rip the pages, trying to tear the bank statements and the marriage certificate. "It is mine," she screamed, tearing at the paper like a wild animal. "It is my money. I earned it. I lived with him for 40 years. I earned every penny." But she never got the chance to destroy it. The two plainclothes detectives, Miller and Davis, moved with a speed that belied their size. Miller grabbed her wrist mid-air. Davis grabbed her shoulder. They spun her around with practiced efficiency. "Beatrice Bennett." Detective Miller said, his voice booming over her screams. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Click, click. Beatrice struggled. She kicked out her expensive heels, tearing the white carpet. Her hair came undone, the pearls scattering across the floor like spilled rice. She looked deranged, a bride gone mad. "Get off me!" she yelled, struggling against the officer's grip. "Do you know who I am?" "I am Mrs. Anderson." "Bill, tell them. Tell them who I am." Bill turned his back on her. He looked at me. "I am so sorry, Tom," he said quietly. The detectives began to drag her toward the door. The guests parted like the Red Sea, shrinking away from the woman they had toasted just minutes ago, holding their expensive gowns back so they would not touch her. Beatrice realized it was over. She realized Bill was not going to save her. She realized the fantasy was dead, and she was going to wake up in a cell. So she decided to burn the rest of the house down on her way out. She dug her heels into the floor and twisted her neck to look back at me. Her face was twisted into a rictus of spite, a final venomous strike meant to cripple me. "You think you won!" she screamed, her voice raw and tearing. "You think this is over, Thomas! You are going to lose the house! You hear me!" The detectives pulled harder, forcing her toward the exit. "I signed your name," she howled, her laughter echoing off the walls, manic and terrifying. "The bank does not care, Thomas. The debt is in your name. You are the one on the hook. You are going to die on the street. You are going to lose everything. You are going to pay for every cent I spent." Her voice faded as they dragged her out the front door and into the night, where the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers were washing over the manicured lawn. I stood alone on the altar. The silence rushed back in to fill the space she left behind. I looked at Bill. I looked at the crowd of stunned socialites. Beatrice was gone. She was going to prison, but her words hung in the air like toxic smoke. "You are going to lose the house." She was right. The fraud was exposed, but the signature was on the paper. The money was gone, spent on parties and dresses and lies. And technically, legally, I was the one on the hook for nearly $500,000. I had destroyed her fantasy, but in doing so, I might have just signed the death warrant for my own reality. I had won the battle, but the war for my survival was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the gray, relentless light of a reality check. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the precinct waiting room, watching the clock on the wall tick away the seconds of my wife's freedom. Detective Miller came out holding a clipboard. He looked tired. He told me they had processed Beatrice. She was sitting in a holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with the memory of the ivory silk she had worn just 36 hours ago. The charges were piling up like bricks in a wall. Forgery in the first degree, identity theft, credit card fraud involving sums over $100,000, and the cherry on top, attempted bigamy. The district attorney was not going to be lenient. Miller told me she was looking at 8 to 12 years in a state penitentiary. She would be an old woman by the time she saw the outside world again. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt the satisfaction of justice being served. But as I walked out of the station and drove to Richard Stone's office, I felt nothing but a cold, hollow dread. Beatrice was gone, but her shadow remained, and it was casting a long darkness over my future. Richard was waiting for me. His desk was covered in papers, but his expression was not triumphant. It was grim. He had spent the morning on the phone with the legal department of First National Bank, the bank that held the fraudulent home equity loan. "Sit down," Tom Richards said, pouring 2 cups of black coffee. "We have a situation." I sat down. I knew what was coming. Beatrice had screamed it at me as they dragged her away. "You are on the hook." "The bank has received the police report," Richard explained, rubbing his temples. "They know Beatrice is in custody. They know about the fraud charges. But from their perspective, the loan documents are still valid." "How can they be valid?" I asked, my voice rising. "She forged my signature. I have the affidavit. I have the proof." Richard sighed. "To a bank, a signature is a signature until a court says otherwise. Their internal fraud team reviewed the documents this morning. They claim the signature on the loan application is a 99% match to the signature on file from your original mortgage." Beatrice was too good, Tom. She practiced that forgery for 40 years. "So what does that mean?" I asked, feeling the walls of the office closing in on me. "It means they are not going to release the lien on your house immediately," Richard said. "They are initiating a full forensic handwriting analysis. That process takes months, sometimes a year. And in the meantime, the loan is active. The first payment on that $485,000 is due on the 1st of the month. And if I do not pay it..." Richard looked me in the eye. "Then they will initiate foreclosure proceedings. They will take the house, Tom." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the air leave my lungs. It was the nightmare scenario. Beatrice was going to prison, but she had managed to booby-trap my life before she left. I did not have the money to make payments on a $500,000 loan. My Social Security check would not even cover the interest. I was going to lose the house I built. I was going to be homeless again, just like she predicted. I thought about the $32 million waiting for me in the trust fund from Alfred Thorne, but that was still weeks away from being finalized. The legal transfer of shares, the probate court, it all took time. Time I did not have. The bank wanted their money now. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. I was a millionaire on paper, but I was about to be evicted from my own home because of a forgery I could not disprove fast enough. The intercom on Richard's desk buzzed, making us both jump. Mr. Stone, the receptionist, said, her voice tinny through the speaker. "There is a gentleman here to see Mr. Bennett. He says it is urgent." I frowned. Nobody knew I was here except Lucas. "Who is it?" I asked. "It is Mr. William Anderson." Richard and I exchanged a look. Bill Anderson, the man who almost married my wife, the billionaire whose party I had crashed. "Send him in," Richard said. The door opened and Bill walked in. He looked different than he had on Saturday night. The tuxedo was gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater and slacks. He looked tired. His shoulders were slumped, and the confident tan of a man who winters in the tropics seemed faded. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut and was still trying to catch his breath. He stopped in the middle of the room and looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound shame. "Tom," he said, his voice quiet. "I did not know where else to find you. I went to your house, but it was locked up tight. I remembered you mentioned Mr. Stone was your attorney." I stood up. "Hello, Bill." Bill ran a hand through his silver hair. "I wanted to look you in the eye and apologize," he said. "I feel like the biggest fool on the planet. I pride myself on being a good judge of character. I run a billion-dollar company. I negotiate with sharks every day. And I let a woman walk in off the street and play me like a fiddle." "It was not your fault, Bill," I said. "Beatrice is... she is a professional. She played me for 40 years. Bill shook his head. "I almost married her, Tom. If you had not walked through those doors..." He trailed off, shuddering at the thought. "I spent all day yesterday with my lawyers." Bill continued. "Do you know what would have happened if we had signed those papers? She would have had claim to half my assets. Even with a prenup, she could have tied me up in court for years. A divorce from her would have cost me millions. 10, 20 million easily just to make her go away. He looked around the modest law office, then back at me. You saved me, Tom. You humiliated me in front of my friends, yes. But you saved my life. And you saved my fortune. I shrugged. I did what I had to do. I could not let her win. Bill walked closer. He looked at the papers scattered on Richard's desk. He saw the foreclosure notice Richard had been drafting a response to. He saw the stress etched into the lines of my face. I heard about the loan, Bill said. My lawyer spoke to the police. They told me she funded her charade by leveraging your home. That $400,000 she tried to donate to my foundation. That was your equity, wasn't it? Yes, I admitted. And now the bank wants it back. They say the signature looks real. They are going to foreclose before I can prove it was her. Bill nodded slowly, absorbing the information. He looked out the window at the city skyline, the city he helped build. He was a man who solved problems with concrete and steel and money. That is unacceptable, Bill said firmly. You should not lose your home because you did the right thing. You stepped up when it mattered. You protected me when you could have just walked away and let me ruin myself. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. It was a long, leather-bound book, the kind used for business accounts. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket. The bank is giving you the runaround because you are a little guy, Tom, Bill said, his voice taking on that boardroom authority again. Banks are bullies. They attack the weak. But they do not bully me. He opened the checkbook and started writing. I do a lot of business with First National, Bill said. I have construction loans with them worth hundreds of millions. When I call the president of the bank, he answers on the first ring. He tore the check out with a crisp, ripping sound. He handed it to me. I looked at it. It was made out to First National Bank. The amount was $485,000. The memo line read, Own payoff, Thomas Bennett. Bill, I said, my hand trembling. I cannot accept this. This is $500,000. Bill smiled, a genuine smile this time, one that reached his eyes. Tom, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You saved me from a mistake that would have cost me 50 times this amount. Consider this a consulting fee, or consider it an insurance premium. He looked at Richard. Call the bank, Mr. Stone. Tell them Bill Anderson is paying off the loan in full immediately. Tell them to release the lien and send the deed to Mr. Bennett by courier today. And tell them if they give him any more trouble, I will pull every account I have from their institution by close of business. Richard grinned, picking up the phone. With pleasure, Mr. Anderson. I stood there holding the check that saved my home. I looked at Bill and I saw the relief in his face. He wasn't just buying me out of trouble. He was balancing the scales. He was a man of honor, just like my father had been. Thank you, Bill, I whispered. Do not thank me, Bill said. We are survivors, Tom, both of us. We survived her. Now let's get that bank off your back so you can start living your life. But I have one question for you. What are you going to do with the house once it is yours again, free and clear? Do you really want to live in the museum of her lies? He was right. I did not want to live there. I did not want to sleep in the bedroom where she planned her con. I did not want to cook in the kitchen where she lied about the price of eggs. I am going to sell it, I said. I am going to burn the memories and walk away. Bill nodded. Good. Because I have a proposition for you. I buy the house. I buy it today, right now, for 20% over market value. You walk away with cash in hand and no baggage. And then you and I go get a steak dinner and celebrate our freedom. It was the lifeline I needed, the bridge from my past to my future. And as Richard dialed the bank, I knew that Beatrice had lost. She had tried to destroy me, but instead she had introduced me to the best friend I would ever have. 3 months later, I stood in the terminal of Charlotte Douglas International Airport staring up at the departure board. The letters flipped and clicked, cycling through destinations that used to be nothing more than names on a map to me. London, Tokyo, Sydney, Paris. For 40 years, I had promised Beatrice we would see the world. I had saved in a jar labeled Adventure Fund, putting aside $20 here, $50 there. But every time we got close to enough, she would find a reason to spend it. The roof needed patching. The car needed tires. Or she simply said travel was a waste of money when we had perfectly good television at home. Now I knew the truth. She was not saving for a rainy day. She was saving for her exit strategy. But standing there with a brand new passport in my pocket and a suitcase full of clothes that fit me perfectly, I realized something. She did not steal my dream. She just delayed it. Tom, over here. I turned to see Bill Anderson walking toward me through the crowd. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and khakis, looking younger and more relaxed than the man I had met in the penthouse 3 months ago. He was not surrounded by an entourage of lawyers or assistants, just a man coming to see a friend off. "You made it," I said, shaking his hand. "I thought you had a board meeting this morning." "I canceled it," Bill said with a grin. "Some things are more important than profit margins. Besides, I wanted to make sure you actually got on the plane this time. No more fake trips to Florida, right?" I laughed. "No more fake trips, Bill. This one is real. First stop Rome, then maybe Athens. After that, who knows?" I bought a one-way ticket. Bill clapped me on the shoulder. "That is the way to do it. No itinerary, no deadlines, just you and the world." He handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What is this?" I asked. "A little something for the journey," Bill said. "Open it when you get over the ocean. It is just a reminder that you always have a home base. You saved me from a prison sentence, Tom. The least I can do is buy you a drink." I put the package in my carry-on. "Thank you, Bill, for everything, for buying the house, for helping me clear the debt." "Do not mention it," he said, his voice serious for a moment. "You gave me back my life. We are even. Just promise me one thing. Send me a postcard. I want to see what freedom looks like." "I will," I promised. We said our goodbyes at the security checkpoint. I watched him walk away, a billionaire who had become a brother. He waved once before disappearing into the crowd. I turned and walked through the scanner. I did not look back. I did not look for Beatrice in the faces of the strangers. She was gone. She was serving the first year of her sentence in a minimum security facility upstate. She had written me letters begging for forgiveness, asking for money for the commissary. I burned them unopened. I boarded the plane. But I did not turn right into the cramped seats of economy where I had spent my few previous flights with my knees against my chest. I turned left. First class. The flight attendant greeted me by name, taking my jacket and offering me a glass of champagne before I even sat down. I sank into the wide leather seat. It was softer than the armchair in my old living room. I looked out the window as the plane taxied to the runway. The city of Charlotte spread out below me, a grid of concrete and memories. I could see the distant green smudge of Royal Oaks where the illusion had shattered. I could see the cluster of towers downtown where Bill ruled his empire. And somewhere down there in a neighborhood I would never visit again was the empty shell of the house where I had lived a lie for 4 decades. The engines roared to life, pressing me back into the seat. We accelerated faster and faster until the ground fell away. The cars became toys. The houses became specks. The weight of the last 40 years, the betrayal, the debt, the shame, it all stayed down there on the tarmac. I was 70 years old. I was single. I was homeless in the best possible way. I had money in the bank, a friend I could trust, and a world I had never seen waiting for me. I opened the package Bill had given me. Inside was a leather-bound travel journal and a heavy silver pen. On the first page he had written a simple inscription. To the man who built bridges his whole life. Now go cross a few. I smiled and looked out at the clouds. They were white and endless, bathed in the golden light of the sun. I had told my wife I was going on a trip to test her loyalty. I lied to find the truth. And the truth had stripped me bare, broken me down, and then rebuilt me stronger than before. The truth had taken my past, but it had given me my future. I took a sip of champagne and opened the journal to a fresh blank page. I told my wife I was going on a trip to find the truth, and the truth gave me back my wings to fly. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones wearing the best disguises. We spend years building lives on foundations we think are solid, only to find out they were made of sand. But betrayal, as painful as it is, can be a gift. It forces us to wake up. It forces us to stop living in the comfort of a lie and face the cold, hard reality of our worth. Never let anyone make you feel small. Never let anyone tell you that you are finished. You can lose your house, your money, and your partner, but as long as you have your integrity, you have everything. The truth might burn your life down, but it clears the ground for something better to grow. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that it is never too late to start over. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and redemption. And tell me in the comments, what is the one place in the world you would go if you had a one-way ticket and nothing holding you back? I will see you in the next video. Safe travels, everyone.